of 2 to 4 years.
Yes, that I know, and longer. It can be longer.
Yeah.
You mentioned interviewing the offender. Were you able to go into the prisons before this? Is that generally how that's done? And now is it done by phone?
It is done now by phone, which is not ideal because we can't make face-to-face, and it's hard to swear people in under oath, which I like to do. Prior to this, we did go in person. We would schedule it through the prison. And this could have been a witness. This could have been a victim that's now in jail himself. It could be the defendant who has asked us to do the review. We've traveled all over the state, and I've actually even went to Virginia to interview a witness.
Is travel generally a part of your investigation?
Yeah. If I can find somebody that might have moved that I need to speak to, either I'm going to bring them to me or I'm going to go to them if I feel that face-to-face is crucial. If I can, now that we're using Zoom, for people that aren't in jail, Zoom has been a really great thing. But for people that are in jail, I can't do Zoom. The prison system has no way to do Zoom connections. So let's say they won't do it. I don't know if they have a way or not, but they won't do it.
Yeah, I know from experience, because I'm in touch with many people who are behind bars, they now have video chats so that they're kind of getting, modern with the video chats, because many prisons are still forbidding any visits for, family members. So this is kind of a substitute. All right. Well, what we know based on data from the National Registry of Exonerations, there are presently approximately 2,700 exonerees in the United States since we began keeping records in 1989. And there are many cases that will never get the attention they deserve. How can we prevent this injustice from happening so often?
Well, I think there's several ways, and I think the conviction review units are a key component in this, and that is training. Whenever I talk to people about conviction review units, I always tell them I have a reactive part of my job and a proactive. The reactive part is me looking at somebody's conviction and seeing if it was a proper conviction or if they were wrongly convicted. That's my reactive piece. But there's a proactive piece, and that is developing policies to prevent the improper use of a jailhouse informant, making sure that attorneys are following the Brady and Giglio requirements of disclosure, and implementing and making sure those policies are followed through with, and that there's training provided to them. Training these attorneys on how to recognize the potential for a false confession or a cross-racial misidentification.
Teresa, I had a question to ask you about the many cases that often end up going by the wayside because there are not enough conviction review units, there are not enough staff at innocence projects across the country, and it's very sad that these people may never get out. But how, in your mind, how can we prevent this injustice from happening? Are there things we know? Are there factors that send someone who's innocent to prison that we should be looking out for?
Absolutely. One of the things I do when I talk about the conviction review unit is I remind people that I'm not just reacting to people that have been wrongfully convicted and reviewing their cases. I'm also working on proactive steps. That includes training and education. For example, we now make it mandatory that all attorneys go through confirmation bias training. You will see confirmation bias is a real problem. And we all do it as humans. It's natural for us to do it. And so we are doing a lot of training. We've got one coming up Friday morning for new employees, new attorneys. But we also educate them on those common reasons that I mentioned earlier about what causes wrongful convictions: cross-racial misidentification, false confessions, prosecutorial misconduct or police misconduct, We look at junk science. For example, the case that we just did an exoneration on relied heavily on bite mark evidence, which has now been found to be basically not reliable at all. And so we train on those things constantly. We not only train our attorneys, but we're working on cross-training with law enforcement so that they understand what the pitfalls are as well. And hopefully that will help us prevent wrongful convictions to begin with.
Right. But you're talking about right here, that needs to be happening across the nation, right?
It absolutely does. And whether or not a prosecutor's office has a conviction review unit or not, they could still do the training and the education and creating policies that will help prevent these common reasons for wrongful convictions. For example, where I came from in Indianapolis, we had developed and implemented a week-long training between prosecutors and homicide detectives so that we would train them together to make sure we avoided some of those pitfalls in how to interview suspects and or witnesses, how to secure evidence, what to do with it. And so we didn't have a conviction review unit, but we still were doing policies, we were still doing training. So every prosecutor's office can develop this proactive piece, even if they don't have a formal conviction review unit.
That's good. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you, you used a term that I'm familiar with, but maybe my listeners aren't. What is confirmation bias?
Sure. Confirmation bias, the easiest way for me to explain it is that when you believe something, then you look for anything that will substantiate and support your belief instead of looking for things that prove you wrong. We don't like to be proven wrong. We don't like to be proven that we've made a mistake. So, for example, if out of the corner of your eye you thought you saw somebody running down the wrong way of the street, and that's what you saw, and then you look over and then things don't look quite as clear, you will look for factors that will support your initial assessment was that the guy was running down the street the wrong way, instead of trying to look for things that would disprove yourself. And that is a real problem, because what happens are prosecutors, and especially police officers and prosecutors to some extent, they believe they get the right guy, and then they don't look at the evidence that may prove they got the wrong guy. Instead, they look at the evidence that supports their initial assumption.
Yeah, right. That's very, very well put, and something that I think people may not be aware of. Well, we are just about out of time. I know you have agreed to return next week for the third in the series of these podcasts about conviction review units. And next week, we'll hear more from you about the case of Robert Dubois, which is quite a case. I read quite a bit about it, and I'd like you to share it with our listening audience. I welcome you back next time, and we will hear more about that case. And please join us for another episode of Pursuing Justice. And thank you so much for listening today.